In the 19th century, this incredibly powerful idea called manifest destiny just swept across the United States. It fueled this relentless push westward, and while it promised a brand new beginning for some, it brought absolute devastation to others. So was this expansion a story of heroic progress, or was it something way more complicated? Let's get into it. Okay, I want you to just transport yourself back in time for a second. Picture it. It's the 1830s. You're standing on the banks of the Mississippi River. Everything behind you is the established United States, but in front of you, a continent, just stretching out to the horizon. This vast open space that just whispered of a fresh start, of land, of a completely new life. You can see why that dream pulled millions of people west. And this really gets us to the heart of our whole explainer. Was this push to the west ultimately a good thing for the nation? Now that's a question that goes way beyond just adding more territory to the map. It forces us to ask, okay, who actually benefited from all this new power and opportunity? And who paid the price? So let's start with the promise, right? What were the big ideas that got this whole massive movement going? Because you gotta understand, for millions of people, the West wasn't just a place. It was this incredibly powerful idea. And the main engine behind all of this was this concept called manifest destiny. What's so wild about this idea is how it framed the whole expansion. See, it wasn't just seen as a political goal or an economic one. For a lot of people, it was a divine mission, a belief that the United States had a God-given right, maybe even a duty, to spread its values and its borders all the way from one coast to the other. So what did that promise really look like for the average person? Well, it was this potent mix of personal hope, the chance to completely start over on the frontier, and this big national ambition. The country saw a future with just immense prosperity coming from all this new land and all these new resources. And it was all kind of wrapped up in this noble-sounding idea of spreading American democracy. It was an incredibly compelling vision. But, and this is a huge but, here's the fundamental contradiction. This new, more inclusive democracy, what we often call Jacksonian democracy, it was only for some people. So yeah, voting rights expanded for most white men, but that very expansion was built on the deliberate exclusion of Black Americans, Native Americans, and women. So freedom for one group was literally tied to taking it away from others. And that brings us to the other side of the story, the flip side of the coin. Because for every single promise that expansion offered, there was a really steep price. This so-called progress was, for so many people, a story of profound loss and violence. The scale of this is just hard to wrap your head around. We are talking about millions upon millions of acres of land seized from Native Americans. And this wasn't some empty wilderness. This was the ancestral homeland of entire nations. Policies like the Indian Removal Act were designed to systematically and brutally force indigenous peoples off their lands, all to make way for white settlement and, of course, the expansion of the Cotton Kingdom in the South. And let's be clear, this was not a peaceful process. It was a constant drumbeat of conflict. You can see it decade by decade. The 1830s were defined by the forced removal of Native Americans. Then the 1840s brought war with Mexico, which added huge new territories like California. And with every single new acre of land came this explosive question. Would it be free soil or would it be slave soil? By the 1850s, that question was pushing the nation right to the breaking point. So all of this forces us to go back and really re-examine that core idea. Was manifest destiny truly this noble, unifying vision? Or, as many historians argue today, was it actually something much darker? A convenient justification, a story people told themselves to rationalize the conquest of land and the oppression of non-white peoples. And ultimately, the promise and the price of expansion were just on a collision course. The very forces that were pushing the nation west were the same forces splitting it apart, creating, a house divided against itself. And if you look at American society at the time, it was just deeply fractured. On one side, you've got this powerful engine of expansion pushing west. But pushing back was this growing wave of reform. You had abolitionists demanding an end to slavery. You had activists fighting for women's rights. These movements were challenging that very narrow definition of freedom, and they were arguing that America's ideals had to apply to everyone. And the crazy part is, every attempt to compromise just seemed to make things worse. Take this idea of popular sovereignty. The plan was, hey, let's just let the settlers in the new territories vote on whether to allow slavery. Sounds democratic, doesn't it? But in practice, it was a recipe for absolute disaster. It led to violent clashes in places like Kansas, as both pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces literally rushed in to try and control the vote.
So why are we even talking about the 1840s today? I mean, it's ancient history, right? Well, not really, because the choices that were made back then laid the groundwork for the debates that continue to shape our world right now. This isn't just history, it is a living legacy.
I mean, just think about the questions this era forces us to ask. Who gets included in American democracy? Whose land is sacrificed in the name of progress? How far should the power of the national government extend? And maybe the biggest one of all, who gets to define what it even means to be an American? These aren't just historical questions. They are at the very center of our national conversation today.
So we kind of end up right where we started, but the question is a lot sharper now. It's not simply about whether expansion was good or bad. It's who benefited and at what cost. And grappling with that question, well, that is the enduring legacy of Manifest Destiny.